Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsmen Podcast, coming at you with some Q&As right here off the bat, and then we're going to talk about some scouting trips that we recently did here in Alabama. Had a really good scouting trip, as opposed to last week when we had kind of a bad scouting trip. So anyways, Jacob, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing real good. So part two of Bobby Worthington's episode just dropped, so it's even better now. Got some more content out there for you guys. Talking some rut funnels with Bobby Worthington. So doing really good. Again, had a very productive scouting trip over the weekend with Thomas. So went to a different piece of public land, haven't been to in a little bit, and we found the bucks.
Found them. Also, our scouting video with Bobby Worthington is out right now. We'll link it in the show notes below. And I believe we have a Q&A submission on this episode that's actually going to relate to that. But what we actually got to do is after we finished recording with Bobby, we actually went out on his property and walked the place, and he showed us a couple funnels and essentially showed us in the field exactly what he was talking about in the podcast and walked us through how he goes about breaking down a funnel to get, he's a traditional bow hunter, so he's looking for that 10-yard shot, roughly, 10, 12-yard shot. And he went and showed us exactly how he did that, so that was pretty eye-opening. I got to be behind the camera for that one. You were out with Bobby, and it's pretty entertaining. It's actually hilarious. Bobby is hilarious.
Bobby on how do I put this? I was gonna say in the down low. I don't like that. Anyways, Bobby likes to roast, and there's a couple. He says a couple things in there. It's entertaining because you can see on my face. He says this stuff. And I'm like, dang, Bobby.
My favorite one is where he's like he's showing you the scrape. And he's like, "This is what we got here, Jacob's a scrape," and you like touch the licking branch, and he acted like he raised his hand like he was gonna slap you. Dude, I laughed so hard when I was editing that video. I'd forgotten he did that. And he's like, "Don't touch it." He said, "Don't touch that limb."
That is funny, but later on when we were looking at a certain trail, I'm not going to ruin it because y'all got to go watch it, but we're talking about a certain trail, and he says something about the trail, and on my face, I'm like, wow, I'm an idiot.
There was another one that didn't make it into the video, but you did
the hole?
No, you said something, and he's like, you accidentally got something correct. It was like, dang, dude, you got roasted. I was behind the camera. I was like, dang, I'm glad I let Jacob
it's
be the subject on this one.
It's so funny because I called Bobby over the weekend because I was telling him that you had uploaded it, and I was watching it, and I'm like, it's actually funnier than, I knew it was going to be kind of funny because some of the things that he'd said, just at me, just kind of like joking, like, this is how Bobby is. He's like, well, I was trying to be funny. I'm like, that's the fun part about it. It's just you being you, and it's hilarious, but also there's some great information in it, too, so you're going to learn a lot watching that video. And again, in literally probably, I guess we were out there for maybe an hour, I learned so much from him of, like, things that we've overlooked in the past.
Yeah.
So newfound perspective kind of going into the season, some specific rut funnels. And actually one of those I kind of checked not this afternoon. I checked it over the weekend. Actually, Thomas wants to go back out there this afternoon, depending on when we wrap all this stuff up and go hang some cameras.
Nice. Cool. All right. Well, let's get to the first Q&A. This one has to do with how soon do you walk or how soon do you hunt an area after you walk it? So,
by the way, appreciate everybody submitting Q&As. You can go do that. There's a link down in the video description or the audio podcast description of this episode, where you can go and submit your Q&As on our website, that's southernoutdoorsmen.com. And again, we'll answer those on these Thursday episodes. So appreciate everybody that's already submitted them. But if you have a question, whether directed to a specific guest or a topic that we've discussed on the podcast, please write those in, and we'll go through them on these Thursday episodes.
All right, this one is from Trey Schote, I think is how you say your last name. He said, hey guys, been listening to y'all for about 6 months now. Love the podcast. It's helped me look at my family's pine plantation property in Louisiana a bit different, in a different, better way. My question for y'all is, while y'all are pre-hunt scouting, it seems like y'all walk through a lot of quote-unquote honey holes, bedding areas, feeding areas, and whatnot. How worried are y'all about ground scent, and how long after walking through a sweet spot would y'all be interested in hunting? Do you feel comfortable going back in, or how long does it take us to feel comfortable going back in and hunting that spot? So I'll let you take this one first.
I think it's based off the time of the year. If it's preseason and you're doing it early season, kind of like what me and Thomas did, if I don't have to go back in there a week before season, I'm not going to. I do want to hang some cameras though in there in like one specific spot, just to kind of get like what's the size of some of these bucks that is laying down a lot of this sign, especially these rubs and scrapes, which I'm very surprised finding this time of the year. Again, by the time we were out there, it was late September, and this area doesn't rut until much later in the season, and there's rubs and scrapes everywhere, which I've never found on this specific property. So I would like early season. I'd be a little more kind of tedious on it, depending on like how invasive you are. Like, are you actually jumping deer? If you're walking through an area and you are hearing deer get up and take off running, that's a little bit different than if you're skirting the edge of it. Because again, there's people doing that all the time on a lot of the public land, and even on some private land too, depending on how your access is. So I'm not super worried about it, but where I'm definitely not worried about it is during the rut. Like if it's the rut and it's some kind of travel corridor, or it's a great example, a big clear cut I want to watch with a rifle in Alabama during the rut. I'll go walk the crap out of it that morning, and the next morning come in there and go hunt and feel fine, because deer are going to kind of intermingle all throughout that thing. So to me, it just really kind of depends on how invasive you are. Are you actually jumping up a lot of deer? Because if it's around like a food source, or if it's around some kind of travel area, to me, it's not that big of a deal. If it's in like a very well-used bedding area, depending on how big the bedding area is, like if it's down here and it's a big clear cut and they're kind of scattered throughout the whole thing, it's a 40 to 80 acre clear cut, that doesn't bother me all that much, because the deer could just move off 100 yards, still be in that cover and not have to worry about it. Versus if you jump them out of like a little hardwood drainage that's thick and you blow the deer out, to me, I'd look at that a little bit differently. But to me, early season, if I don't have to go in there and bump it, it's a spot that I feel a lot of confidence in, kind of like what we're going to talk about later in this episode, of where I found a spot that I feel very, very confident the first week of season trying to kill a buck there. I'm just going to try to, be as low impact as possible in that spot. But during the rut, I really don't care.
So let me flip it around a little bit. And our season opens October 15th, where you scouted the other day. So let's say it was already deer season and y'all walked in there and you found all that good sign. Are you waiting a week to go hunt it, or are you just going to go back in the next day and hunt it?
No, like once season's here, it's a different story. Like I'm just going to go and hunt it and just kind of see how it plays out. But for like the opening week strategy, once you find everything and the trees aren't quite dropping yet, they're just kind of getting blown out and there's some feed sign underneath the trees. There's a bunch of sign all next to it, close to the bedding area. That's all I need to see. I really don't have to put a camera. I'm not going to put a camera necessarily in some of those spots. It's more kind of the outside of it, because the only time I would check that camera is if I'm going in there and hunting.
Okay.
At that point. But again, during the season, it's like if you're going to hunt feed trees, like any of the feed tree guys we have on, you're hunting it the same day or within the next day or two of finding that sign. So you're going to have to do that. And again, a lot of that feed sign, you're not going to necessarily find right next to bedding areas. Now, on the flip side, some stuff we're going to talk about is right next to the bedding area. That's why I think there's so much sign being laid down right there, where they're just kind of intermingling between some white oaks and some really thick cover. But again, I think it's a double-edged sword. Like if you're in an area where there's a very limited lack of cover, I'm probably the best way to put it. I'm trying to think of a habitat type that would be like that. Maybe some of the big river bottoms, if there's not like just a lot of great cover and the deer kind of bedding in more visual advantage. You just got to have to play your cards however it lays out. Like if I think I'm going to bump a ton of deer, you're just going to have to bump them and then figure out like, is this something I can actually come back and hunt in that circumstance? So I think a lot of it's kind of like you will learn. If you go in there and you see some deer and you jump them and you go the next day and they are not showing up, it was too invasive. Okay. And then on the flip side, if you do that and you go in there and again, you start seeing some deer, like you can have more confidence in it. So I think, again, not really answering the question all that great, but you just got to kind of test it out. I think he said this is family property or something like that, or hunting club.
Yeah, family property.
So, if it's like 50 acres or 100 acres, I would try to be as least invasive as possible, because you just don't have a lot of acres to work on. When I'm on public land, I really don't care all that much, other than, again, opening week, limit as much pressure as possible, just walk in the area after you found some of that sign, and then setting up accordingly that first week of season, try to get a deer killed quick.
Yeah.
So, because all the small property stuff, all the guys that we've interviewed, like, again, go back to Alan Summerford, he's using a lot more work on, he's finding his spots, he's dropping his cameras, he's kind of sitting back, and he's using some annual patterns specifically on hunting that property, and then very specific windows of time of when he's hunting it to try to kill like a specific deer. And it has a lot of success doing so. So I just know this, when we've hunted our family farm growing up and we hunted the fire out of it to the point where Anthony was like, okay, we're going to lay off on this thing for a week because we're hunting it so much. It's 89 acres and there's 5 of us on 89 acres. He's like, let's lay off for a week and see how the deer react. Because, the deer learn so fast when you put a lot of pressure on a small property.
Yeah, I would say that for like an opening week strategy, kind of like Jacob's talking about, like, I think it's best to go in. We're talking about walking through your honey holes. I think when you're going to do that, it's best to do it in one go if you can. So it's like, I'm not going to try to run in there after work necessarily and like go check part of it where I'm going to have to go and check a different part of it a different day. I'd rather wait till I've got a day off and I'm just going to go and walk everything all day out there, and I'm gonna get everything out of the way, and then I'm not gonna go back to it until I'm hunting. But to get to, I think maybe a little bit of the heart of the question is like, after you walk something, how long is it before I feel comfortable hunting it? If it's a good spot, I'll go and hunt it the next day, even if I bump deer out of it. And one reason I say that is because we have a unreleased interview that's going to be coming out here, I believe sometime in October, with a biologist who did GPS collar studies in multiple states, Georgia and South Carolina, but specifically the interesting part is South Carolina. They were dog hunting a property. They had hundreds of dogs and people out there hunting this property. And what they found was when the deer were getting kicked out of their core areas, their bedding areas, their feeding areas, what they were doing is they were just making a loop and they were going right back into the same bedding areas. And so even with the most intense hunting pressure possible, literally like hundreds of dogs on this place, super, like the goal of hunting this property was to bring down the deer population. So it's like they're shooting everything. It's like as much hunting pressure as you could get. Those deer still wanted to go back into their bedding areas, their home ranges. They didn't want to leave their home range. So that's one reason where, like, even if I bump stuff, I feel pretty good about it, especially if I'm doing in-season scouting. Like, yeah, in season, if we're trying to locate the deer, going and walking through the area, I don't feel too bad about, going back in there. I'm trying to not be super invasive or anything like that. So it's maybe different if you, like you were talking about, if you walk right through the bedding and just completely blow everything out, that might be a little bit different. But generally, as a rule of thumb, if you're sneaking around and you're kind of scouting, even if I bump some deer, if there's good sign there, I'll go right back in. Good example, North Carolina. We walked through this huge area in North Carolina looking for feed trees. We got to this one knob, and there was feed sign everywhere, and we blew deer off of it. And I was like, and it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and there was already deer on these white oaks that were up on this ridge. And that told me, I was like, okay, they want to be here. There's feed sign, there's heavy trails, and there's already deer here. So I went right back in the next morning, and I had a bunch of deer within bow range that next morning. So that's why I just say that, like, even if you bump deer, that's not really the end of the world. Or even if you don't bump deer, like, honestly, when I go into those areas and bump deer, it makes me feel a little bit better. It gets me a little more excited about going back in there.
Yeah.
So it's situational. Like, if you're going out scouting for hot sign and you find it, that's different than if, like, I'm going and hunting, like, my rut funnels or whatever on the club that I scout ahead of time. Then, I'm just not going to go in there because I already know what's in there. But again, I wouldn't feel bad about bumping deer and just going right back into an area.
God, I had a good point and I just totally lost it. Kind of go off what you were saying.
Talking about our biologist episode.
No.
That's gonna drop?
So this is it kind of goes off that. Based off some of the data that we've looked at and kind of talked about in the podcast, the deer aren't completely relocating. Like, if you bump them, they're not just going, 1,000 yards a different direction, and now they're going to stay there. They're going to come back to that area. But the thing is do they come back in where you can have a pattern where you can actually shoot them in huntable areas? Because one thing I was going to mention is we're not walking through, unless I have to, I'm not blowing through a pine thicket this time of the year.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it. First off, it's miserable. Like, have fun. Like, I was already bleeding in my arms. I didn't even have to walk through a real pine thicket. I'm like, have fun if you want to walk through some of that stuff. And at least our area kind of we're finding some of the deer bedding. So it's more like skirting the edges of it. And I feel like that, along with when you walk it, you probably have a better success of not necessarily bumping a bunch of deer. If you find the sign and you know, like, hey, they are more than likely in this 30-acre pine thicket. There's sign coming in and out. There's rubs coming in and out. There's feed sign adjacent to it. Like, they're coming out of this stuff. I'm not walking in there because I can't hunt in there unless you're going to sit on the ground. Mm-hmm. And again, these pine thickets, the one I was in, good luck. Like, I don't think you shoot, unless you're shooting buckshot. Like, you weren't going to shoot a deer past 10 yards in that thing with a firearm, let alone a bow. But I go back to thinking of Jacob Leischen. He's been on the podcast 2 times now, maybe 2 times. I know he was on twice last year. He talks a lot about, again, finding the freshest sign possible, keep staying on the move, and then hunting it like right then or the adjacent day. And he's talked specifically about, if I remember correctly, that's what I was trying to think of when you think about this when you were talking. I think he was talking about specifically if he's going to bump a buck, he'd rather do it in the morning up until like noon because it gives that deer such a long time to like bump away, kind of ease off to a different area. He has the whole evening to like kind of get his wits about him and then go rebed somewhere in the morning, hopefully in that same general area, versus bumping him in the evening. And then he's out all night, kind of a little freaked out. And he might not go directly back to that bed the next morning or that bedding area where he can try to step and kill him coming back to that bedding area. And I think that's a good point. Like, I'd rather scout mid-morning, late morning up until like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and then kind of get out and try to walk as much as physically possible during that time frame and then dip before the deer are really on their feet, kind of going back out. Because I don't want to, like, if I don't have to encounter a bunch of deer in the afternoon, I don't want to.
Yeah.
Unless I got a weapon in my hand. If I got a gun in my hand, I don't really care. Like, if it's gun season, it's fair game, but I've never killed a deer like that anyways. So I think that's just a good tip. So again, going back to this listener, I'd look at those episodes. I can look them up real quick with Jacob Leischen, because he talks a lot about this. But again, a lot of the properties he's hunting, I mean, he does hunt a little private, but it's 90% public, and they're bigger tracks. So like if he screws up an opportunity on this deer and he doesn't think like he can get back on them in like a short time frame, he's going to work over something else. So I think it's just a different perspective looking at like smaller acreage properties, unless this guy has 5, 6, 7, 800,000 acres to work with. But yeah, anyway, so it's an interesting discussion.
Yeah, I mean, when we killed our bucks on some of our Alabama bucks that we shot on public land a couple years ago, we were in that area for like 3 or 4 days, and we had walked all over it. We'd packed deer out, and we were still hunting that general area, even though we were seeing deer, bumping deer. So it's like, again, like I don't think it's really a giant deal unless you're just like really like being super, super invasive.
Yeah, and that episode with Jacob Leischen, it's episode 530. Again, these are available on YouTube and also on all major listening platforms. Episode 530, creating a buck finding formula with Jacob Leischen. And there's kind of a second part to that. Backtracking buck sign to the sweet spot with Jacob Leischen. Again, all that's 530, episode 530. Then we had him back on for episode 542, master late season bucks with Jacob Leischen. And he uses a lot of the same kind of strategy there. So he's over in North Carolina, but he hunts a bunch of different states. So might be a really good one for you to go back and listen and or watch and kind of get a better perspective of how he does what you're talking about.
Yep. All right. Next up, we got Zachary Hutchinson from Georgia. He said, so after learning what a funnel is, I realized I'm already hunting in one. I've found numerous droppings and 2 rubs, several doe encounters while crossbow hunting this season. My question is, I have thick woods to my left, a briar blowdown thicket in front of me, and a pine thicket to my right, and behind me is a big cotton field. My question is, I'm crossbow hunting the edge of all 3, and I have a shot from wherever they come out of. So far, only does are coming out of the hardwoods. Should I go in the briar thicket or pine thicket or stay where I'm at for the chances on a buck? It's a funnel because there's a cotton field to the south, someone's yard to the north, and to the west is a horse pasture, and the woods I'm in is about 150 yards wide and runs a long ways to the pasture, then turns right. So I'm in a funnel that has heavy deer traffic, so I do not know where I can see the hardwoods and briars and pines, or if I should go to a specific area. They all run together in about a 40 to 50 yard area. I wish I could send you a pic through Google Earth. Should I just be patient and wait on a buck, or should I try to get aggressive and go into something after him? That's kind of tough based on what you said. I'm going to say probably not go into the briar thicket.
Where's he at?
Georgia.
Okay, I'm going to let you answer this and I'll get my thoughts here.
I don't know. From what it sounds like you're in a pretty soft funnel. And if you're hunting with a crossbow right now, it doesn't sound like they're getting pinched down super, super hard. You say it's 150 yards wide, but everything comes together in a 40 to 50 yard area. I mean, I don't know. If you're seeing does there, I would maybe, if it's truly a funnel and you're seeing does there, I would maybe not even hunt it until the rut if you're really wanting to kill a buck right there.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Okay, yeah.
Like if you have that much confidence that it's a good funnel, don't waste your time right now like trying to hunt it and just educate all those does if you're not going to shoot a doe. Maybe you do want to shoot a doe. Have fun. I mean, by all means, I want to shoot some does this year. But if you're trying to shoot a buck in that spot, it goes directly back to like what Alan Summerford talks about, along with other podcast guests, and Bobby Worthington. Again, part 1, part 2 with Bobby. This came out this week and then last week. Saving those spots to specifically during the rut, as long as you think it's a good enough pinch point for you to hunt, which I don't know where he's at. And it sounds like he's somewhere in South Georgia or Southern Georgia, talking about all the ag and everything. I don't know when it ruts down there for you guys, but timing that specific spot with the rut would probably be really, really good, and kind of staying out there until that time frame, and then execute on as much as you can opportunity-wise during the rut. And then also keep the does less educated, especially if you're ever getting busted, and I'm sure even if you don't think they're busting you, if you're walking in there and they can never catch your scent, catch your trail, they're going to be educated. And if the does aren't using that funnel, there might not be as good of a chance the bucks aren't going to use that funnel as much either. If the does kind of shift their pattern just a little bit, they may just move 50 yards where you can't see them in that briar thicket. But I would look at that, specifically hunting it during the rut. And then also, I still would go scout it. Like, again, midday, walk around in that crap and just see, is there a better pinch point for you, specifically if you're just going to be hunting with a crossbow. I don't know if you're going to hunt with a rifle during, gun season, or what you're going to be hunting with during the rut. But see if there's anything else in there that might be a focal point for those deer to kind of come through or come around. Look for that. And then also, if there's not, and you really think you're in the best spot where your line of sight's the best area for them to cross through, I would 100%, if there's not already a scrape there, which I bet you if you look hard enough, you're probably going to find a scrape. But if there's not, I would make a big mock scrape in that gap.
Yeah.
That would be.
Now you're speaking my language.
That would be tremendous. If there's not already, now again, if you haven't walked it and you haven't looked for looking branches, I would suspect there's already going to be a scrape there. But if there's not, put a mock scrape in that area. And I think you could have a lot of success. Not only get an inventory of deer if you want to run trail cameras, or you don't have to run trail cameras at all, but just to have a focal point for those deer when a buck comes through that funnel, especially pre-rut, he's going to stop at that scrape, check that scrape real quick, and keep moving. It'd be a fantastic opportunity for you to be able to stop that deer right there in front of you, and that's something Bobby talks about in part 2. And doesn't really talk about on the woods walk, because some of that footage we didn't use, but he talks about that quite a bit of, again, placing that mock scrape specifically right there where those deer are going to get pinched down through to stop that deer, and also just it's something that he can check while he's coming through that funnel and have some success there. So I'd probably look at doing that as well.
Yeah, Zachary, like in this situation, this is just me personally. Like some people might have a different opinion, but if this is a good funnel that does are using and you're interested in killing a buck, then this is exactly what I was talking about on the first question. I would walk in there and scout it like you're talking about, and then not hunt it again until the rut. Not go in there, not run cameras in there. I would do like nothing in there until the rut, and then I would go in and hunt it. And if I'm wanting to shoot does, then I'll go find some feed trees. That's when I start doing like my feed tree tactics and stuff. Because like, yes, I'm trying to kill bucks on feed trees, but a lot of times when I'm hunting feed trees, I'm trying to kill a doe. I'm deer hunting when I'm hunting feed trees. I'm not necessarily buck hunting. So like if you're in a really good funnel, then yeah, I would definitely save it for the rut. That seems like that's definitely what I would do. That's kind of how I approach all my spots. All my good funnel spots, like I don't hunt any of my funnel spots anywhere in the entire state until it's the rut. And I'm usually gun hunting, baby. Usually got the boomstick in my hand. All right. Last question. This is from Jack Stark from Georgia. He said, "Hey guys, I'm having trouble with the wind when it gets above 7 to 10 miles per hour. I'm in North Georgia. I got several spots set up for different wind directions. I check the forecasted wind before I choose a spot for the day, but a lot of the time, once I get in my tree, it's completely different, sometimes 180 degrees from what all the apps say it should be. I've got a pretty good grasp on how thermals affect my spot on calmer days, but I'm having a hard time predicting stronger winds. Can terrain or edges be affecting this?" Yes. Or maybe characteristics of weather fronts I'm not understanding. Thanks for all the help, and thanks for answering my last question this summer. Good luck out there, Jack. Yes, 100%. Terrain, edges for sure affect it. And again, we kind of describe the thermals like, think of the thermals like water running downhill. Wind is kind of the same way. Instead of necessarily like water running downhill, think of like water flowing across the top of it like it's a creek bed. Like there's going to be eddies and there's going to be swirls and like kickbacks and all kinds of stuff in there, undertows, and the wind is exactly the same way. And the more mountainous you get, the weirder it gets in our experience, especially when we were just in North Carolina a couple weeks ago. The only time we could get a predictable wind is when we got on top of a ridge and we were at a higher elevation than the ridges directly adjacent to us. So in other words, that wind is like supposed to be coming out of the west, let's just say, and we get high enough where there's just air around us. The wind is not having to hit another ridge and roll over it to get to us. I can look over across to that next ridge and see over the top of it. Then the wind is doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's a west wind and it's hit me in the face. But the minute we drop down like 100 feet and we get below the crest of that next ridge, that's when it starts doing really weird stuff. And like, I know, Jacob, you just absolutely nerd out on this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So one factor that I don't think gets talked about enough, we mentioned on the podcast, but it's even worse. Swirling winds are even worse when there's still leaves on the trees. If you are hunting an area that has different sub canopies of vegetation, like you've got, like, I'm looking out window behind the cameras and there's a bunch of big pines and hardwoods out there, and there's not a ton of understory. Well, that's going to have a lot more consistent wind going through it than if there is a sub canopy layer at 8 to 10 feet of like thicker cover, and then up above it there's another level of canopy cover, and then above it's like the big oaks and the big pines and all that kind of stuff. The wind's going to swirl throughout all that because it's adding more drag to that wind, especially when you get higher wind velocities. But even if it's lower wind velocities, I mean, you get that real fickle 2-3 mile an hour wind, it can bounce off that stuff like crazy when there's leaves on the trees. But once the leaves come off the trees, they fall, then it's a lot more less drag for that airflow to be able to go through that timber, and it's going to be a lot more consistent for you. So that's something to also think about as well. That's why it's, like, to me, really frustrating when you're hunting around habitat edges, whether it's like a pine thicket next to a big tract of hardwoods where you have a lot higher canopy cover in the hardwoods. The wind can eddy and spin specifically in the corners of where, like, that clear cut or that pine thicket meets those hardwoods. That wind can eddy right there. It can, if it's coming over the hardwoods, it can swirl back on itself. So you may think the wind's at your back because the wind's coming directly out of the hardwoods if you're sitting in the corner of a power or of a clear cut. But actually you start dropping milkweed and you can feel it coming back in your face because it's eddying over the top. And that's something that can be caused specifically because of the drag on all the leaves around you. So to me, that's a really big factor. And then also, yeah, elevation definitely can make a factor. To me, the elevation makes more of an issue with higher wind velocities, like 6-7 mile an hour winds. Like, you could have some significant eddying, but really when you start talking 10, 12, 14 mile an hour winds, there's a certain point when you could get down low enough in elevation, it is completely different from where it is on top of the ridge. And that's something that you got to kind of pay attention to as well. But definitely hunting around, like, food plots are notoriously bad for wind. Like, especially like a small food plot, like, and it's not very big. Actually, I was doing this yesterday. I was running pepper. I almost videoed it. There's where I'm at, there's a small field that's probably maybe an acre in size, and it's like a triangle field that I run pepper out in. And there's a big tree line on one side of it. Say it's a big triangle. On the long side of the triangle, there's a big tree line, big hardwoods. And then on the other triangle, side of the triangle to my right, that kind of cuts out in front of me, it's medium-sized, like probably like 25-foot trees instead of like 60-foot trees. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side of the triangle, the other edge, it is like brush and like smaller saplings, okay? And you get out in that, and when I'm walking out through it, because like walking up to it, to that little tree line where the big timber's at, the wind will be like coming directly from the south, okay, hitting me in the back of my head. I'm walking north. The second I come out in it, it is 180 degrees different. It's coming out of the north at that point. And it's supposed to be a south wind, but that wind is coming over the top of those trees, and right there within like 40 yards of that tree line, the wind is swirling back down and sucking back into those trees. And it's super consistent. And then, like, I've looked at it from different areas, and I might actually shoot a video there. I don't know, just for Instagram or something. But it is crazy. Like, I haven't dropped milkweed, but you can watch the wind on one side of that field. The wind's going in one direction, and then where I'm at, it's going a completely different direction. That's why hunting around fields, like small food plots and stuff that have like big trees around it, can be so crazy, especially early season if there's a lot of hardwoods, because the wind can swirl so much in those areas. One reason why a buck might want to come show up in it, because everything's swirling. He can check in every corner. He can go to one corner and smell everything up in front of him and behind him because the wind's swirling those spots. So it is super, super annoying hunting those kind of locations. That kind of goes back to like the old school hunters mindsets, like some of the guys we've had on the past, and like guys I grew up with, like my uncles and guys they used to hunt with back, especially like in the 70s and 80s. It's all about how high you can climb in some of those circumstances. Like, that's where you hear a lot of old timers talk about they'd use a climber, like a Baker climber, and they'd climb 40, 50 foot up a tree, because you get up to a certain elevation and the wind is consistent up there. It's not swirling in up above where all that turbulent air is down below it. Not saying to go do that, but that's what a lot of older guys used to do. I mean, that's why you'd hear in the South a lot of guys taking a climber and they're trying to get literally as high up that pine tree as they possibly can in order to get it like a consistent wind. So there's a lot of factors there, but yes, going back to habitat, vegetation can be a huge factor for you, along with the terrain. But to be honest, early season to me, it's more of the vegetation than it is the actual terrain itself, because you can hunt some of those areas, later in like November, December when the leaves fall off the tree, and it's a lot more consistent for you, and the thermals are a lot more consistent for you as well versus early season. Because again, early season with all the leaf canopy, for the thermals to work, the soil temperature has to get to a certain temperature in order for the thermals to start rising. And if there's a lot of big canopy over the top of you and a sub canopy, it takes it so much longer for that thermal to start rising in the morning. But again, when the leaves fall off the tree, you notice it a lot quicker later in the year, along with more consistent winds.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's like if you got like a leaf blower and you're blowing off your back porch or something like that, and you get to that corner and it just shoots back at you or whatever. I mean, anyone who's ran a leaf blower has experienced that a time or two. It's the same way with the winds moving across the landscape, and that's a really good point about the vegetation affecting it. And also, you can kind of look at the terrain and somewhat predict what it's going to do depending on the situation. Like I've talked about it before, but I've got spots at the club that we hunt where I know when it's a south wind, like you can kind of look at the topo map and you can be like, okay, on a south wind, it's probably going to hit that ridge and just angle a little bit. And it's really going to be like a southeast wind. And sure enough, you go in there and it's doing exactly that. Now, it doesn't always work out that good, especially, again, as you get into more mountainous country and there's more big ridges that can affect it. If you're in an area that's relatively flat or you have a couple big ridges and those are your main topographical features, you can predict it reasonably well. And I've been able to do that. Also, you can learn it in your area, kind of like you're talking about having history with spots, and you go back later in the year and it's more consistent. You can, if you hunt areas enough over the years, you're going to be able to kind of predict, like, okay, I know it exactly like on the club. When Mike missed the 10-point last year, he was hunting that spot after we had figured that out because it was a south wind, and we're like, okay, it's probably going to be a little bit more, because on the wind that we had that day, it wasn't really a great wind to actually hunt that deer on paper. Like if you looked at the map, you're like, I don't know about it. But us being in there enough, we kind of knew that it's probably going to angle out and you're going to be cutting it close, but you'll be good. And sure enough, he was. So it's something that you can build experience with and kind of figure out over time.
Also, so I just thought about, and I've seen this when I've hunted Arkansas, like earlier in bow season, is if you're hunting like open woods, like open hardwoods is the best example I have because I personally have seen this. Open hardwoods, and it comes like maybe off to one side of you, 30, 40, 50 yards away is that thicker line of cover, and it's like still big timber, but there's like a thicker understory. You can watch it. It's crazy sometimes. You drop milkweed, and you can watch that wind. If you're kind of angling your wind where it's kind of going to some of that cover, but you got trails up in front of you that are coming out of that cover, so the wind's in the deer's face, but you're far enough off that trail, it's not going directly to the deer. You could watch that milkweed. You could drop it, and when it hits that brush line, if it's thick enough brush, it will go up or down that brush for a little bit before it actually cuts into it when it finds like openings in that canopy, openings in that cover. And that's something else that you can kind of see as well. That's one reason why, again, a lot of us in the South, we don't have a lot of milkweed. If you're in the deep, deep South, like if you're like, even I've never found it in North Alabama. Maybe once or twice I found milkweed in North Alabama, but most of the time I've had to go to like Tennessee or further north in order to find milkweed. Like we found a bunch of it in North Carolina. But if you're like in Georgia, South Carolina, Mississippi, Louisiana, like maybe there's milkweed there, but I've never found it in the deep South. But if you can get your hands on some, okay, whether you go buy it online, you go up to somewhere a little bit further north of you and go and actually pick some, it will teach you so much more about what the wind is actually doing in your spots more than your puff bottle. Puff bottle is cool, but it doesn't tell me exactly what the wind's doing 40 yards downwind of me.
Yeah.
And that's where you can kind of see some of that swirling activity. Or you drop milkweed and it goes behind you when you're in your stand or in your saddle, and then 10 minutes later, you see it come drifting back past you. There's a reasoning for that. Might be terrain, might be vegetation, or just for whatever reason, like there's something happening pre-front, that wind's swirling through there just naturally outside those factors, and it's causing that. And again, you'll learn a lot about that specifically using milkweed.
Dude, you know what's funny is when we were in North Carolina, you can tell like who's from the Midwest and who's from the South when we were hunting with Zach because of how he used his milkweed. Like when me and you use our milkweed, we're like getting one puff out, and I'm like fanning it out to make sure it's a perfect little puff ball, and then I'm like letting it go, and I'm like really watching it. Dude, when he gets his milkweed out, he's like, whew, I mean, just throwing it like confetti, dude.
Yeah.
He throws out a handful at a time. I'm like, you could tell that he's got the hookup.
Yeah.
It was like, we got to travel 4 hours north to go find it. There are some varieties that grow down here, but you never find patches of them. It's like almost viney looking, at least the one that I found a good bit. And there's always like one pod. But you go to the Midwest and you'll find a field. Or I mean, I say the Midwest. You can even go to Tennessee and you can find a field of it, and there's like hundreds and hundreds of pods.
If it's like a grown-up pasture, they haven't had cattle in it in like a couple of years, you'll find pods of them. And I'm still like working through a bag. I've got a 1 gallon Ziploc bag. A listener of ours, back in like 2018, I was driving up through Pennsylvania, and he actually gave me a bag, like a 1 gallon Ziploc bag of milkweed, like pods. And I'm still working through, like, dude, I still got 3/4 of that bag left. And
Man, if anyone wants to send us some, I'll give you our P.O. box.
Yeah, I mean, but because it'll last. If you use it the way we use it, it'll last forever.
Yeah.
If you use it like Zach does, because again, he lives in an area, he can pick them all. Like when I was in Iowa, there was so much milkweed, but by the time year I was there, they were all kind of blown out. But like you can just go pick a 5 gallon bucket full, like every season, and like you can use them like that. But like down here where we're at, like you got to be a lot more gentle using it unless you have like a giant bag of milkweed. But it is so effective. It works so well. It's awesome to use, and it really gives you like a better visual just what's happening around you, especially with thermals. It is super awesome for thermals, but even like those light winds, just kind of seeing how the wind's going.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, let's talk about a little bit of deer scout. Now, I'll kick it off a little bit here because I just got one really quick thing to say about my cameras, and that is I put some cameras out earlier this year in spots where I kind of expected bucks to shift to, and this weekend they showed up. That was a confidence booster, I'm not going to lie.
Wait, is this on public or private?
Public. Ironically, all my public cameras have shooters on them, every single one. The club, I got rabbits, crows, and does. That's all I got on camera at the club right now. I got to go move my cameras.
I feel like that was like an intro to like a rap song. Say that again real quick.
What did I say?
Yeah, rabbits, crows, does.
Oh, God.
I feel like it needs to have a beat behind it.
Oh, my God.
Anyway, so you get shooter bucks on every camera.
Yeah, I got shooter bucks on all of them, so I'm pretty excited. I'm not gonna lie, but yeah, there was one in particular where I put it out, and it has not gotten. It's gotten maybe a doe on it, but it's been out for quite a while now, like over a month. And the other day, the first buck showed up. I was like, oh yeah. Okay. Anyway, and he's daylight too. Freaking.
Is that the one you sent me?
8 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, it's 8 point.
Dank.
He's a good deer. He's a good deer.
He's pretty good. That one comes by me opening day. He's getting shot.
All right, and then you and Thomas went scouting.
Yeah, so we went scouting on a different piece of public, and it's an area he hunted last year, and he didn't kill a deer in this spot, but he found a ton of sign. And I'm like, dude, I've never been in there. Like, let's go check it out. And we go bombing off, and he had some cameras. He had a couple Moultrie Edge cameras. And we actually before that, we went to another spot I've gone to. And I've talked about this area in the podcast where there's a ridge system that these bucks just work every year during the rut. There's so much sign right next to the road that's just paralleling the road. Like there's a bunch of deer kind of like going back and forth on different sides of the road, but they're like running the edge of this road through these pines. And I went in there. I told him, like, dude, let's go in there. And let's just hang a camera somewhere in this general area because I'm pretty certain we're going to find one of these scrapes because there's always, like, you go walk this spot and you go find 10, 15 really good-sized scrapes, a bunch of rubs, again, kind of pre-rut time frame on this piece of public. And I'm like, let's go to see what it looks like because I'm like, I think I went in there maybe once last year. I don't know if I even went in there last year. It's been maybe 2 years since I've been in there. But anyways, we go in there, check that spot out, and we're finding tracks, we're finding the trails, but like, and old rubs, but there's no, I found like one really good looking branch, but again, they haven't worked the ground at all, which didn't surprise me, but I was like, oh, this looks pretty good. Like, you know, it's in that pine, it's not a thicket, but in this pine stand, there was a privet bush, Chinese privet bush come up. And it always seems like in some of these areas in Alabama, like I'll find scrapes on privet bushes for some reason. And, this looking branch was all tore up, but ended up doing a big loop. Ended up also checking the community scrape in there, or used to be a community scrape, where I'd had that deer buck charge me, I don't know, 4 years ago. I've talked about on the podcast, and they're no longer using it. Look, you can't even tell like they're using that looking branch and that little water oak sapling. So we ended up doing a little circle and started kind of paralleling some of the cover. Ended up finding the scrape, like the scrape. And the ground is worked. It's like opened up.
How far did they shift?
No, it's not. They're not shifting. I mean, it's still like I've seen that scrape in the past.
Okay.
I didn't think it was going to be open. I didn't think they used that much, but they have been using it. You can tell all year long. Not just not pawing the ground, but like the looking branch is destroyed. It is another Chinese privet, but they've broken it off, and there's like a big limb coming off, and a bunch of other limbs, and they're all being worked. And it's right next to like a thicker edge of cover, and like the buffer area, kind of upper, like closer to the road. And I'm like, let's throw a camera here and just see, because like clearly, like of all, and we continued walking that cover, and that was the only scrape that we found that was like super, super defined and a really good size scrape, and there's trails kind of intermixing through it. So I'm like, let's put a camera here, just get inventory. Like I'm not saying like necessarily you come back and hunt this spot. You could maybe, but like I'm not super worried about that. But like just get inventory of bucks working through there, and then we ended up bouncing to the next spot, and this next spot I've never been to. Literally never been to this area. And he's like, all right, we're going to walk down here. Man, there were scrapes all in here last year. And he showed me on the map where the scrapes are at. And I was just thinking in my mind, I'm like, I don't know if these scrapes are still going to be here. Because like this, the way where they were marked at, they're on logging roads. And I'm like, I don't think, they use like just little testosterone scrapes they use for 2 weeks of the season, 3 weeks of the season, and they don't ever touch them again, which is cool for inventory during a very short window of time. But like that doesn't help me out if you're trying to get like annual patterns of deer.
Yeah.
Because to me, those are kind of like hit or miss. We start walking down in there, found some turkey sign, which I was a little excited about, to be honest. But he's like, man, there was a scrape right here last year. I'm like, yeah, we're right in the middle of a logging road, dude. Like, deer ain't using that right now. It's not going to be used. They're not using that looking branch all year long. And like, you couldn't even look at the ground and tell there was ever a scrape there. But he said, man, this scrape was huge last year. And I'm like, okay, cool. Looking branch, like all the damage when a deer's using the looking branch, especially if they're using it consistently throughout the year, which you'll find scrapes they do that on, it never gets a chance to grow. Like you never see like extra new leaves come off or stuff like that if they're using it throughout the year. And all these, they'd grown over, like you could not even tell they were looking branches. So I'm like, yeah, none of that interests me. And we ended up doing a little circle, and we ended up jumping over to another ridge. And as we're working through the next ridge, I found a couple really good trails. And I was like, man, let's just kind of follow these trails because they're running up a drainage. We hit that drainage, and Thomas dropped down. I kind of run around the head of it, and I crossed the drainage, come up the other side, and found 2 really good whip rubs. Like one's on like some little hardwood sapling that was probably like 6 foot tall, and he had the whole thing up to like chest level, just completely destroyed. And then 5 yards away was a pine sapling, probably 4 foot tall, and the whole thing's just tore up. And I'm like, and they're super fresh. Shavings laying there. We just had some big storms, and the hurricane came through. And I'm like, it's definitely within the last couple of days. I'm like, awesome to find that. I'm like, dude, this is good. And there was a big trail that was side hilling right there where those 2 rubs were at. Well, as I start walking in the woods, because Thomas had come up the ridge further down from me and crossed a little drainage, he's like, hey, come look at this. He's like, tell me if this is feed sign. I walk up, and there's these 2 big red oaks on the side of the ridge and these pines, and the whole ground is just tilled up underneath them. And I'm like, it looks like it, but like I can't find, and the trails come right there, and the trails kind of like disappear right there at those 2 trees. And I was looking up in the tree, and like just the canopy cover of the pines, I can't see through them about that well to see through the oaks. I'm like, I could see a couple branches, but I'm like, I don't see any acorns, but there probably is some up there, and these are dropping early. Because we were talking to other guys, and like Scott Seals, and he was talking about like finding red oaks dropping like 2 weeks ago. And like the bucks were really hitting on them, and he was catching buck inventory on them. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that might be what was happening, but clearly they're using this area enough that there's no acorns laying underneath it right now. Ended up dropping off the ridge, hitting a creek bottom, or there's like thick, nasty creek bottom. Got down there, found another whip rub, found feed sign under 2 white oaks. For sure feed sign, found acorns laying on the ground, like fresh acorns. And some feed sign, and there's a whip rub right next to them. I'm like, okay, cool. But it's like a spot, like, I don't think you could hunt it. Like, it's so thick and nasty, and just like, I don't think you could shoot, unless you went in there, and if it was private land, because public land, you can't like trim shooting lanes or anything, you'd have to be doing some serious cutting to get an opportunity. Even sitting on the ground, it was just like thicker, just nasty. Dang. So I'm like, okay, this is cool to find, but I'm like, I don't think the deer are bedding super close to the spot. I think it's on the other side of the ridge. So we hit the creek bottom. Second we hit the creek bottom, Tom's like, do you smell that? And I'm like, what? He's like, man, it smells like buck urine down here somewhere. And I'm like, I couldn't smell it because I was up above him, so I dropped down to him. And the second I got to right where he stopped, it like hit me in the face like this pungent, just smelled like the nastiest scrape I've ever smelled. I'm like, okay, either I don't think there's deer just peed here. There's either a scrape here close by, or maybe there's a bed or something in this general area, like something in this general area that it's all the thermals kind of dropping down this creek bottom you're smelling. And I got there and there's like 4 or 5 white oaks. Like there's 2 in the bottom and there's 2 more going up, or 3 more going up the side of the ridge. And he wanted to like work up the creek bottom a little bit. I'm like, dude, you have that? I'm walking up this ridge point and I want to see if I can find anything up there. Like there's white oaks up there. I just want to see the sign, the cover, or come up on another pine thicket. I get up there, found more feed sign underneath another white oak, and there's droppings underneath it. And a couple acorns laying on the ground. Looked up in the oak, or in the white oaks, and they're loaded. Like I could just look at it with the binos. And I'm like, okay, there's acorns in this tree. Marked it. I'm like, this is great. Kind of right on the edge of a real steep drop off going down to the creek, and there's trails cut around right there, and there's like all that sign. No buck sign right there, but just feed sign. We end up bouncing across.
Wait, so how close is the feed tree to the bedding and the buck sign?
I kind of missed some stuff. Some other buck sign I forgot we seen. It's kind of like all mixed in, but it's not like, it's all kind of like partly open woods. It's not like where I'd figure I'd see a deer bed this time of the year, but there was a pine thicket up on top of the ridge that I was working up. Now, previously, back when we saw those 2 whip rubs, or the first 2 whip rubs, the good ones we'd found, the trail kind of kept going across the ridge. I was like, I want to follow this trail back and to see if I can find anything else. I hit that trail and there's some tracks right there, and I barely get down that trail, maybe 15, 20 yards. I look up because the trail kind of split, and there's a larger fresh rub, kind of like maybe 2 inches in diameter, that was right there all tore up. I'm like, oh, this is good. Called Thomas over. We walked up, saw that, and I could see like the punch holes of when that deer had come through there in the pine straw, like going up to this other little logging road. So I'm like, let's just walk up there and see. So we walk up there. It opened a scrape right there. Dude, we counted 7 scrapes, like pawings on the ground, where this buck could come through, and every overhanging limb on that logging road he had hit. Every single one of them.
Old dude got a little testosterone bump.
For 100 yards, and I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, clearly he's all fired up. And anyways, found all that, circled back. But kind of getting back to that far ridge I was talking about. As we're working back down, I'm like side hilling down this ridge system, and there's just white oaks everywhere. I'm like spot checking them. Thomas is like, he wants to go back up on another ridge on the side of the creek we came from, but it was a ridge further down from us. That's where he found one of these big scrapes last year. And I'm like, you can go do that. I'm going up here because for sure this is the best cover is up on top of this ridge. There's got to be deer sign up here. Like if there's this much buck sign, we've already found by this point like maybe 6 or 7 whip, like good rubs, bunch of whip rubs, and probably 3 or 4 like better, bigger rubs. I'm like, I'm going up here. You go down there. You go have fun with it. I know where the truck is. You know where the truck is. Like I'll find you in a little bit. As I'm going up this ridge point, there's 2 gigantic white oaks right there, huge white oaks. And I get to them, and one of them is tealed. I'm talking about like some of the best feed sign I found in Alabama. The whole thing underneath it is all tealed out, and leaves are all overturned. And I can see deer crap from 15 yards away. There's deer crap all underneath this tree, and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. This is it. And I looked up in that tree. Tree's loaded. It's like, and again, there are some acorns on the ground, greenish yellow, like they're not quite mature yet, so still got some time, which that's what I'm looking for, because I'm like, I don't need a tree that's dropping super heavy right now. I need a tree that's starting to drop barely because of some of the wind we've had. Yeah. And there's feed sign, and then hopefully in the next 2 weeks, by the time season comes in, then it's starting to drop, and then we can hunt it then. Because if it's dropping now, it might be dropped out before season comes in.
Yeah, because you found these on what, like September 28th?
6th, 7th, something like that.
Yeah, so you're scouting this, 15 plus days before our season opens.
Yeah. So that's why I was like, when I found some of the feed, I'm like, there's clearly deer here, but I'm like, I needed one of those trees that's still holding really heavy, and it's going to, hopefully have a more delayed drop. Well, I follow that ridge point up, and as I'm going up that ridge point, like those oaks are on a flat up from the creek bottom, and I can see up the point, and there's trails on one side of the point's real steep, the other side's more gradual. And I can see trails cutting in and around the steeper side. I'm like, oh, this is good. They're coming around that pine thicket. I'm like, we're going up there to the pine thicket. So I get up there. Through the second I get up there, there's an old logging road, which you couldn't see on the maps, on the back side of this pine thicket, okay? This old clear cut. It's all grown up with pines. Pines are probably, I don't know, 6, 8 years old, something like that. Mm-hmm. Second I get up there and I get on that little logging road, there's a scrape that is sitting there on this giant licking branch. It's like kind of a big licking branch that looks like a cigar, and it's all chewed up, twisted. And I'm like, this is it. I yell back at Thomas because we don't have cell signal. I yell back to Thomas. I'm like, bro, and I was like, he's like, what? He's on the other side. I'm like, again, we weren't scouting real quiet or anything like that. I was like, dude, you need to come over here. And he's like, what? I'm like, I just found a huge scrape. And he's like, man, I don't know. He's like, I'm gonna go check this scrape up here. I'm like, all right, I'll see you back at the truck, because I'm like, I'm not leaving this spot. I'm gonna walk this whole pine edge.
What, did Thomas not want to cross the valley?
No, dude, he was
Thomas being a little pansy.
He was super sore and yeah.
God bless him.
He was tired.
Poor thing.
I get up here, all this stuff, like, after, like, hunting in the mountains and stuff up in North Carolina, there ain't nothing in Alabama that's like,
there ain't nothing intimidating.
There's nothing intimidating. Dude, like, if you want to go 7 miles one way, that's fine. Like, I'd rather do that here than, 4 miles up there.
That's what Zach said. Me and Mike went out this past weekend, and we walked over 11 miles. And when I got to the truck, I was like, that was nothing.
Yeah.
That was nothing.
I'm like, I'd rather do that than some of the stuff in North Carolina.
Yeah.
But so I follow that logging road. I'm like, I want to see how, like, I want to see if this is a logging road that people are also using coming in from this other road system. And I follow it, and I go, and it, like, heads out. It stops the edge of this drainage, like runs up this SMZ hardwood drainage. It runs up in this clear cut, or this pine thicket. And, like, it just disappears. Like, you can't even tell there's log road there. It's just thick and nasty. I'm like, well, clearly nobody's coming from that direction. I turn around and start walking back, and I had walked by a really good rub that I didn't see because it was only rubbed on one side where that deer was coming out of that pine thicket down the logging road towards that scrape. I'm like, all right, cool. This is real good. I made a little video. I was like, man, this is going to be a killer opening day spot. That white's right off the tip of this ridge. That sign's coming out. The scrapes right here. Like, there's trails. One trail's going right down the logging road. There's 2 trails going down the side of that ridge, kind of wrapping out towards that point, and just sitting off that point where you can cover those trails coming down the side of the ridge, and then also this trail coming over the top where the scrapes at. This will be perfect. Well, then I'm like, I'm just going to keep walking this old logging road, kind of watch out the side of the ridge and looking through the pine thicket and to see if I can find more rub scrapes. Dude, I do that, and I just keep finding sign. More rubs, like really good rubs. Another scrape, down this whole edge of this pine thicket. And the logging road right there just kind of meanders around the edge of the drop-off. And I come up on some more white oaks. Every white oak I found on that side of the ridge, it has acorns in it, which is a good and bad thing, okay?
Yep.
Because now there's multiple options at the same elevation going down the backside of this pine thicket. And I end up finding a cedar tree that's probably maybe 6 inches diameter that had been freshly rubbed. And it's one that you can tell if it was hit the year before, kind of like what Bobby talks about, historical rubs. You can tell it got hit the year before. This other buck had come in here. He had touched it up. It's on a real steep embankment. I had to kind of walk down to it to get to it. And got back on the logging road, found 2 more scrapes and 4 more fresh rubs. And then all this stuff where I found this concentration of sign was all within a 50-yard gap, where, like, the ridge has like a how did Bobby say it? Like, there's like a low spot in this ridge where this ridge kind of comes around, it dips down and comes back out from the pine thicket, and the pine thicket kind of wraps around, and that little cove, which isn't 50 yards wide, is where all the concentration of buck sign was. Way more than the point that I found the bigger scrape on. And it's like all the trails, you can see all these trails coming out of the pine thicket. Also, the pine thicket got thicker there too.
Was it like a ditch running up the side of the ridge?
Super subtle. Like, it's almost not even, it's kind of a ditch, but it's just a bow. It's, just a bow in the ridge. And it's like real slight going down, but it's real steep. As in, it's like not a big defined ditch. And all that sign's coming out right there. And it's like paralleling the pine thicket and then also dropping down. And there's 3 white oaks right there. Every one of them I looked up in, and there's just acorns in them. And there's 3 right there in that spot where all these 4 scrapes are at, these 5 or 6 rubs at, and the bigger rub just down below it. And it's steep enough that the deer, you can see the trails. Like, there's trails cutting below the white oaks where they're running the side of that ridge, and there's a drop-off below them that they can't. I mean, they could go down it, but they're getting air going down if they want to. They're like cutting up above it. Now I'm looking at this, I'm like, man, you could get in here so clean. Opening day, afternoon hunt, coming from the far side, crossing the creek, slipping at the bottom side of this. And the problem is the deer are going to be eye leveled with you. Like, you can't get high enough up in one of these trees to, like, be shooting down, but you can get up in the saddle, up in one of these trees and one of these other, like, red oaks down below you, and shoot that whole hillside and actually be able to shoot to that logging road where all the sign's coming out of. And then I get down a little bit lower, there's trails coming down, they kind of just meander out in the bottom. There's beech trees down there dropping the most amount of beech nuts I've ever seen. Like, if they were mountain oaks, you would trip and slid and died. Like, there were just beech nuts everywhere. But anyway, I made a loop back, and at this point I had no communication with Thomas because I have no idea where he is. So I ended up hitting that logging road, or I hit that ridge point he wanted to find a scrape on. I get in there, and dude, it's all pine trees that are like maybe 8-10 inches diameter. It's pine straw. It was like very little amount of deer sign. Like you can't even find punch holes, like very like old trails that aren't being used. Because in pine straw, the cool thing about tracking deer in pines or looking at trails in pines, you can tell if deer are using it.
Yeah.
Like there are punch holes. Like if there's a decent amount of pine straw, you can see where every deer has stepped foot in that stuff. And I wasn't finding any of that. And ended up getting higher up on that ridge, and I found one fresh rub right there where one big trail was coming down the ridge point. It split off to drainage. There was one big rub right there, fresh rub. But I made a loop back to the truck, and I met up with Thomas, and I was like, hey, did you find anything? He's like, no, that scrape wasn't there. I'm like, yeah, you idiot. You should have came across the ditch, the creek drainage, and gone up there with me because that place was loaded. But what was amazing was, and this is what I was trying to get at with this, he found all this big sign, fresh sign, tons of scrapes and rubs during the rut.
Yep.
Well, I'm finding them right now. I found them all right now before season even opens. So this is like for sure a big core area that there's probably a couple different, hopefully mature bucks in this area. I would assume they're mature bucks based off some of the sign, and found a couple big tracks that are using this system of this creek system, and they're using it during early season, and they're also using it during the rut, which to me gives you like the highest odds of chance of like trying to kill one of these deer and not like try to rush into it right now. Like, yeah, try to kill one early. But, like, these deer are using this area and feel so comfortable with this area that, like, you have a really good opportunity to try to kill a deer. Early season, pre-rut, rut, late rut, like, they're using this area quite a bit for whatever reason.
Yeah. So what's your strategy? Are you going to go in there and, like, hunt them a couple times opening week and then lay off and then try them again later?
Yeah, I want to try to go in there, and specifically, if we had the right wind, I would put Thomas. He can have either one of the spots, but he doesn't know the spot, so I'm going to have to walk him to the spot because I'm not dropping him a pin. I'm going to walk you like, this is the tree you climb. This is what you're looking at, okay? But really hunt it with two guys. One guy on the first ridge point that had the big waddock with all the feed sign and the big scrape up above it. I'd have one guy sit there, and the other guy 200 yards down is sitting this, called a low drainage coming off this pine thicket that all this sign's dropping down to. And one guy sit right there. I think one of them is going to be seeing a really good deer and hopefully get an opportunity if everything lines up on an afternoon hunt.
Okay.
Like,
all right.
I would not hunt in the morning because, like, I don't know where in this bottom they're going to be at, but specifically in the afternoons, I think it would be killer.
What if you went in there on an afternoon hunt and you just saw like 2 does or something like that? Would you go in like the following morning and just get in early and throw a sit at it? I'm trying to get through like the thought process here. If you know you're gonna hunt it early season and just throw a couple sits at it, on like that second or third sit, will you get a little more aggressive and try to hunt the morning, or are you just straight up only hunting afternoons?
So the problem was all the sign I found, all the rubs and everything are either paralleling that ridge or coming off that ridge. So I didn't find anything going up that ridge. So I don't know if they're going back up the same way they're coming down. That's the only problem.
To me, it sounds like they're not then. If you didn't find anything going up it, that to me almost seems like they're coming out and they're probably leaving out and going somewhere and they're looping back into that a different way.
But that's why I'm saying in a morning hunt, I don't know how much is that. If they're coming in from 300 yards further down, they're going back into that pine thicket. I don't think they're just going to come out and linger right there. They may. I
don't know. I think Scott Seals would say different.
I might have to call Scott Seals about
because you remember Scott talking about in his episode, he's killing them at like 10 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You know, he's killing midday deer a good bit. So I mean, you never know. And also you're talking about like point to point travel. Yeah, in early season, I feel like you don't have that as much. You know, where they're getting up and they're going point A to point B. I feel like they do get up and linger a little bit more in early season, especially if you're finding feed sign that heavy. That tells me they're lingering. They're definitely lingering. So that's why I'm asking, because I'm like, the way I wasn't there, but the way you explain it to me, I'm like, maybe that's a spot you ease up into a little bit after daylight. Throw a midday afternoon sit at it, see what happens. You know, hunt it. Give it 3 solid days, opening week, see what happens. You know,
for sure. I mean, I told Tom, I was like, this is the most confident I've ever had for an early season spot, like sign wise.
Really,
100%. Oh, in Alabama, 100%. Oh yeah.
So now again, you're about 16 or so days removed from opening day.
I say that because I did say that last year too, and I found some real big sign. I jumped a deer, like where these scrapes and feed sign was. And only hunted them one time, and that was right when a big cold front came through, 25-mile-an-hour winds, and of course nothing showed up. But anyway, no, I feel really confident right now just how this lays out.
So 15 days, roughly, to when you can actually start hunting this. So between now and then, let's say when you get like 5 days out, would you go back in and spot check it and try to find the exact trees that are hot at that moment?
Yeah,
or are you just going to wait until opening day and then just go in there and
No, I mean, I'd probably spot check. I probably wouldn't work the whole top edge, but a lot of this, you could see some of the feed sign. If you were a little bit lower in elevation, not next to the bedding, I think you could spot check it pretty good, especially if it's going to rain.
Yeah.
If it was going to rain 4 or 5 days before season open, 3 days before season open, I'd be out there right there before the rain or right during the rain and just walk it and look for that sign and then bounce.
It sounds good. Here's my challenge to you.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see you go in there and hunt it 3 days in a row. Maybe not the same exact tree, but hunt that little area right there. You know, give it 3 days rather than, you know, going this what. And I say this because I do it too. Go in there, you hunt it one day, maybe you see a doe, maybe you don't see anything, and then boom, you're off and you're in a totally different drainage somewhere else the next day. So you think give it a couple days? Where are you at?
Based off the sign I'm finding, 100%. I think it's worth spending 3-4 days in there, just because I mean you can tell there's. I don't think it's just one deer. I think it's a couple different bucks. I think where the concentration of sign was in this this low spot on the ridge, this little low drainage that the 3 whites are in. There's like 3 or 4 scrapes right there and a bunch of rubs coming in and out of the pine thicket. There was 2 trails that the sign, like the rubs are like facing out of, like where the deer is coming out of this pine thicket and then dropping down. That might be 1 or maybe 2 deer right there, but I'd be really curious. That's why I told Thomas, I don't even really care about putting a camera in there, to be 100% honest. Like, I don't think you need it. I think it's just kind of spot checking the sign. Like, the signs tell me there's a buck in here, and based off the size of the rubs, it's probably my standard of deer at least. Okay,
especially with a bow.
Yeah. So like, I don't really think I need the camera. I think the camera would just make it like.
The camera would talk you out of it faster than it would talk you into it, most likely.
Yeah.
Because it's like maybe you put a camera there and you get a really nice deer on camera and you get even more excited. But it's like right now you're already so excited about it. You're already confident. It's like, what is the camera going to give you at this point? Right?
I mean, yeah, because I'm like Bobby. I'm not trying to kill a 180. That 110-inch 8-point come out opening day, he doesn't have a chance. He gets it within 20, especially 25 yards. He doesn't have a chance.
It's going down.
We're having a Euro mount up here on the wall at that point. So that's just kind of my thought. Like, just based off the sign, based off the area, based off how big the sign was last year. Also, another thing I didn't mention, dude, we found so many old rubs from like last year, a couple of years ago, that are huge in this area. I mean, pine trees bigger than my calves, which I got really big calves, guys, by the way. But, 6+ inch diameter pine trees that are scarred up like waist high, like kind of belly high, scarred up these trees. And I'm like, if any of those deer are still alive in here early season, it's anyway.
I've ran cameras in spots on that property like that in early season, and I've had a bunch of daylight bucks in spots like that.
Yeah.
Especially like on the margins of that thicker cover, and they would be kind of like Scott talked about. They'd be there at like 10 a.m. or they'd be there at 1 p.m. or maybe they'd be there at last light, or maybe they're there at 7:30 in the morning. It was just all throughout the day. I think when you get really close to their bedding like that, and you're on top of those feed trees, like they could come by anytime.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. So kind of going back to like doing a morning sit there, like kind of getting like Scott is, like leave the truck at gray light, slowly slip your way in there. It's not a rush. You're just trying to get in, get set up by like 7:30, 8 o'clock. Really 7:30, 7 o'clock would be great. And you meticulously are quiet. You pick the tree, you climb up and get situated. There's probably actually a pretty good chance that deer could come through there, like you said, mid-morning spot checking. Look for those, feed on those oaks, kind of going in and out of that bedding, because it is literally, it's so close. It is the pine thicket from these oaks is no more than 10, like from the first oak is 10 yards from the pine thicket. It's 30 feet.
Well, so, and assume you're like 15 to 20 yards on the other side of that oak tree from the pine thicket. There's a good chance that you're 60 yards from the deer.
Yeah.
And that just underscores, like, you got to be quiet. Like, you really got to be quiet. And maybe that's something, I feel like that's something that is actually overlooked a little bit. Like people don't realize how loud they're being, myself included, again, speaking from experience here. But like when you really slow down and you really soundproof your gear, because when like that situation, it's like, dude, you're probably very close to those deer. Like, and you have to treat it like that. Like you have to go in with the mindset like, hey, this deer is within 100 yards of me. Like he can hear me right now. You know,
100%. But also, good thing about early season is more leaf foliage. Sound doesn't carry as far, but still carries. But also, that's where I'm a little soapbox. When guys talk about, man, I can get up a tree in 7 minutes. I don't care how fast I can get up the tree. I want to be as quiet as possible. If it takes me 30 minutes to get up the tree, which is pretty normal, like get completely situated from the bottom of the tree to like hanging there, bow set up, everything is perfect. 30 minutes, that is fantastic. Because I'm trying to go as slow as possible, super methodical. Like it's not a rush. It is all about getting in as quiet as possible, especially I think early season is a big deal like that. Because again, the deer aren't traveling so far. So if you are really close to food, that's really close to bedding, the quieter you can be, the better off I think you're going to be in that circumstance. Yeah,
and it's just like understand that, you know, he might be within 100 yards of you and you might not see him for like 3 hours.
Yeah.
You know, he might be laid up in there and it's going to take a while for him to get up and work his way out to you or her if you're hunting does, whatever.
I told Thomas, I was like, if I hunt the one spot where the concentration buck sign is coming out, that little low spot on the ridge, I'm not shooting a doe there. Now, if I go hunt that ridge point, the one that had all the feeds, like crazy feeds underneath it, droppings, and that scrape up above it, I'm kind of far enough off the drainage and everything. I think I could shoot one and they'll go around down on the bottom. Not going to be that big of a deal.
Yep.
But in the other spot, I'm not shooting down in the other spot. I say that now. I don't know.
It's a little different when she's at like 12 yards and she's like quartered away. You're like,
listen, there's been so many times I'm like, I'm not going to shoot down. That happens. I'm like, I'm shooting you. Like, give me the bow. Give me the bow. That was like my one of my Tennessee doe I shot a couple of years ago, opening day in Tennessee on public. I saw that spot. I found buck sign going back behind some ag fields on the side of a steep drainage, creek drainage. And I sat up, dude. I'm like, I'm going to kill buck here opening night. Like there's buck sign coming out of this. There's a thicket right there, just nasty thicket, and there's big tracks and rubs coming out of it. Dude, I got up that tree. I was 12 foot up that tree, and I hear something stick break behind me like 2.5 hours before daylight or before dark. And I look back and I see these two does coming. I'm like, they get to like 30 yards. I see them there at 30 yards, and they get to like 25 yards, and I'm like, oh, I'm shooting a doe. Like, I'm shooting a doe, 100% shooting a doe. And dude, I freaking drew back, shot her, and anyways, that was the whole one I spined, and she made god awful sound. I had to shoot her a couple times.
That's terrible. That was terrible.
But if it wasn't for that, I felt so confident kill a buck in that spot, like opening day.
Yep.
And yeah, anyways, so it kind of goes back to like if you don't have to shoot the deer, shoot the doe. Kind of let them linger off, and hopefully, you know, that bachelor group comes through. It kind of goes back also, based off the sign I found, I think the deer are fairly well broken up. Like the higher, like all these scrapes opening up and stuff like that. Like I can't imagine necessarily, maybe some younger bucks together, but I think like your 4-year-olds and stuff, for just based off some of the sign, like they may not just be together right now. If they are, they may be sparring.
On our Moultrie account, did you see that buck that showed up the other day working the scrape? I'll have to show you.
The shed one? The one that shed?
Yeah. He's like a 10-point.
Oh, yeah. He's got the kicker thing coming off.
Yeah, he's got the extra brow tine.
Yeah.
Dude, he's a stud. I don't know if you slowed that video down and look. Dude, he's
a good one.
He's a freaking stud. That's a good deer, dude. He's a good deer. Did you see his G3s, dude?
Yeah.
His G3s are... They get him killed, son.
I mean, listen. Yeah, he's a good deer.
And he's by himself. And then that other buck on the other camera, he's by himself too. I haven't got a bachelor group at all lately.
Well, yeah. I was so surprised about the amount of sign I found. Like I was thinking like small whip rubs, stuff like that, but like the bigger rubs, the scrapes opening up all around this area. I'm like, this is getting me pretty excited. Also, something that we've never talked about, but I brought this up to who did I mention? We had a listener message us, and he was talking about seeing like bachelor groups, like all these bucks broken up, and seeing a lot more like just a higher testosterone, like bigger rubs, scrapes opening up and stuff somewhere in the southeast. And I don't know anybody that ever carries rattling antlers with them early season. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about smacking, but I'm talking like ticking those antlers together a little bit.
I've heard that in early season before. In October here in Alabama, I've heard that.
I'm not going to lie, because it's so close to this pine thicket. I think it.
Dude, I would try it. I would try it. That is actually, that excites me a little bit. So explain what you're talking about.
So, and this also goes like Shane Parker. He put on a group message. He had a buck a week ago with a broken main beam.
Yeah.
Dude, they're throwing hands, okay, right now. So what we're talking about is, I've never heard anybody talk about necessarily early season, like in Alabama, October 15th-ish, taking rattling antlers with them. And I'm not smacking antlers, none of that stuff, just taking those tines together and just some subtle grinding of the antlers. If you're already that close to potentially where the deer are bedding at and they hear that, and they're already laying down all this, I'm going to call it more aggressive sign, like these bigger rubs, more damage to the trees, opening scrapes up, stuff like that. I think it's a curiosity thing. Like, well, who else is over here? Like, what's going on? And then kind of hopefully maybe get them on their feet. And something that could potentially work early season. Like in the right sort of, like I want to do, if you went to an area and you had buck still bachelor'd up, probably not going to work out all that well. But once they split up and they're kind of laying down that sign, I feel like you could probably capitalize a lot earlier in the season by rattling and doing some grunts, but probably more rattling than kind of, a little bit later on.
Just the light ticking.
Yeah, I wish I had those sheds. I don't know where they're at. I'll do it real quick. But I'm seriously thinking about doing that. Like, because I was like, dude, the amount of sign they're already laying down. And, like, there's, like, these bigger rubs that, like, I didn't think I'd find on this property in September, to be 100% honest. Like, if it was, like, October 15th, okay, yeah, seeing it. I've never seen it in September out there. So I'm anyways very eager to see if that potentially could work in one of these spots. Where it's just I just need you to come out of the pine thicket and either get on the edge of that logging road or really kind of get into the edge of the trees. Because the cool thing is there's like and I noticed this when I was there. I was on that little logging road where all the scrapes were at, and some rubs right there on the logging road coming out of the pine thicket. When you look off into that drainage, there's like a little bit of cover right there. Like looking down the hill, it kind of like where I would set up. You can't see all the way to the bottom. You can't see all the way down the side of the ridge. Like you would have to come all the way up to the edge and get into the wood line, the hardwoods to see down, which if they do that, should have a shot.
Okay.
If they're right on the logging road, it'd be kind of tough. That's one thing I was kind of getting down like the deer's level, like looking up in some of the trees, and it would be kind of tough if they're right there on the logging road. I need them just off the logging road right into like where all those white oaks should be dropping.
Yeah.
Which would work. If they're dropping, it'll be perfect.
All right. Well, we're going to hold Jacob to it. You better go in there and hunt that.
Listen, remember what I told you during turkey season when you left? Right, you went down to the beach. I didn't kill a turkey. I'm like, bro, I'm going to tag out before you get back. Kill 5 birds in 6 days or something like that. I don't know, 7 days, something like that.
Kill 4.
Oh, 4.
4's the limit. Easy there, Jacob. Easy.
4 in 5 days, 4 in 6 days. Yeah.
Yep.
And then Thomas, and then we killed Thomas's 4. But anyway, so not saying I'm gonna kill a buck right off the rip, but I feel like this is like my best opportunity.
If you're gonna, it's gonna be.
If I'm gonna do it, it's that time.
Okay.
See what he has headgear wise.
Okay, we'll see. We'll see. I'm excited. I'm excited for real.
You actually any spots excited for early season?
Kinda.
Man, dragging your feet.
Son. Where me and you scouted, where that buck showed up the other day, the general area I'm pretty confident in, but I'm gonna have to go in there. I don't have a spot picked out that I'm like, yeah, I go kill one right here, right now. So I'm gonna have to wait until probably about 5 days before opening day or so, and then I'm gonna try to go out and locate some areas. And then same thing at the club. Like I got to go out there and I've just got to walk some stuff.
You need to put another camera on that scrape that we found on our last trip.
Oh yeah, definitely that one. So yeah, I'm gonna go back up in there and just check it out and see what we can find. See if we can't locate some feed trees. My thing is like I don't really try to go scout feed trees until about right now. So sometime between now and opening day of season, and again recording this on September 30th.
Yeah. So
sometime between now and October 15th, I'm gonna go, but I don't have a spot picked out like that yet.
I was trying to think. Oh, so this is just a thought. One thing about like we don't hunt a ton of like real flat land. Mm-hmm. We'll do it a little bit later in the season, but we don't do it early in the season. But probably you could find this in flatland. But I feel like in flatland you have a lot, unless there's like cutting, like logging activity, you have a lot more kind of like those, I'm going to call it like a feathered edge. Like there's not like a hard, thick line of cover next to like slightly more open woods, at least from what I've seen hunting more flatland. But in like more of this hill country, when they're cutting these ridge tops, there's a defined edge there, which I feel like if you can find the buck sign and the feed sign close to the edge, it allows you to be able to come up from the bottom and slip up into that spot way more undetected than potentially like in the flat land, where there's also maybe slightly more cover between you and the feed sign. So that's one thing I'm eager to see, because I've never felt overly confident up until this point in like areas like that early season, but I'm very eager to see how it plays out.
Yep, me too.
And again, Thomas wants to go put cameras off, and not right there. I don't really care about walking back in that spot right now, but there's another area when we walked back to the truck because he was tired, and we drove around to another spot to go walk back into an area we had just walked from the previous spot, but he just wanted to get a little closer to it.
Thomas is soft, man.
We found a bunch of some more really good rubs and some old scrapes not far from the truck, like probably 100, maybe 150 yards from the truck, maybe through the pines. And I was like, dude, we need to come in here. If you want to put a mock scrape out, we got to put it right here, because some of the old scrapes, they're not super great, like looking branch wise. I'm like, we can make a bigger mock scrape right here where all this big sign is, and it's like a thick drainage down below it that we found some doe beds in it, but you can tell the deer running that thick drainage, and the drainage kind of comes up and splits. And I'm like, we need to come put a big mock scrape right here above it, where all that in the evenings when the thermals drop, all that fresh dirt is just drifting down through that thick bottom to draw deer up. And plus it naturally would just be a great spot for a scrape to go, because a buck in the evenings, he can scent check it from that thicker cover down below. In the mornings, he can run up through the pines and check it, just scent check it. And I think that's what he wants to do this afternoon. So we'll see how that works.
All right, let's do it then.
Sweet. So anyway, do we need to read some reviews, man? We ain't read a review in a minute.
Yeah, let's read a review real quick.
I'm letting you do it.
All right, let's see what we got here.
So appreciate everybody leaving us 5-star written reviews on Apple Podcasts, and also all your Spotify listeners leaving us 5-star reviews on Spotify. Appreciate that as well. It's one way you can help us kind of grow the show and give us some feedback, what you like about the podcast and things you want to see in the future. So appreciate everybody kind of writing those in. Again, it takes you about, it takes you 30 seconds to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and if you got a minute, you can type out a quick message for a written review. So appreciate everybody already doing that.
All right. I saw this one a while back. This is a good one. This is from Deer Trout. He says, best whitetail podcast out there, 5 stars. As a longtime Android user, I've never been able to write a review on this podcast, but I've been listening since episodes were in the single digits. I apologize for the audio quality back then. Just got an iPhone for work, and writing this review is one of the first things I'm doing with it, so it'll be a long one. Don't let the name fool you. This is not just a podcast for Southern Outdoorsmen. I live and mostly hunt north of the 45th parallel, and have learned much from this podcast over the years that I've been able to apply to hunting and out of state to get bucks on the ground, especially for the areas that I hunt. I'm one of those guys that consumes a ton of whitetail content. I listen to all the podcasts, watch all the big name YouTube channels, follow the social media, read all the posts on the forums, articles, etc. I also hunt a lot when I'm not hunting. I'm scouting or glassing or studying maps. Because I consume all this content, particularly podcasts, I can usually tell you what the person being interviewed is going to say before they say it. That is not the case with the Southern Outdoorsmen. These guys do an awesome job of finding new guests that haven't already been interviewed on 10 other podcasts. They also do a great job asking questions that will help the listener. My only, and in all good fun, beef with these guys is they're constantly lumping Midwestern states together with the stereotype that we are all hunting bed-to-food patterns in big ag. Most of the Midwest is not big ag and has a lot more in common the South than they might realize. Keep up the great content. Would love to hear more on still hunting / spot and stalk tactics for big woods hill country in all phases of the whitetail season. I appreciate that review, man. That's a great one. That was a really good one. I saw that coming through. I was like, oh, we got to read that one.
Okay.
So, man, we're stereotyping the Midwesterners.
Yeah, I guess, got nothing to say about that.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Hey, I would love to interview somebody on spot and stalk in the big woods. That would be fun. After we talked about it a little bit after hunting North Carolina, I feel like you could do it.
I mean, we kind of did an episode like that with Daniel Lemon last year, because that's how he kills a good bit of his Mississippi bucks. He calls it slip hunting through the river bottom timber. And Yeah, it'd be an interesting conversation for sure. Maybe we'll find another guest that kind of fit in that boat. Also, appreciate everybody real quick. If you're still listening or watching the podcast, I know you're a huge supporter. Appreciate everybody that's already been buying our new hoodies. Andrew didn't wear it today, even though I was freezing in the studio. He says he's hot right now. I'm still a little chilly. Appreciate everybody that's been buying all the new hoodies, the new shirts that have been released, and also all the hats are back in stock. Appreciate everybody that's been putting in orders. Y'all are huge supporters of the podcast, and we love not only seeing you guys purchase some of the gear, but also wearing some of it and then submitting listener success stories wearing some of the gear. So we really appreciate that. If you want to check out any of our new apparel, especially the new hoodies, again, there's a link down in the show notes below in the video podcast and on the audio feed. You go check those out. Appreciate all that support. And again, those things are shipping now. So thank y'all for purchasing all the equipment or all the apparel. Appreciate everybody listening to reviews, sharing the podcast, and listen, deer season's underway. A lot of the states in the Southeast are now open, or by the time you're listening to this podcast, they are now open. So appreciate everybody that's been listening to the podcast. Hopefully you're able to go out there and apply what you're learning from these interviews and go out there and have your best deer season yet. So appreciate y'all watching, appreciate you listening, and we'll catch you back here in the next episode from the Southern Outdoorsmen Podcast. And remember, guys, y'all stay Southern.